The Battle of Normandy, D-Day, the liberation of France. How did Germany fail so catastrophically? While the Allies suffered around 10,000 casualties as a result of the beach stormings at Normandy, France on June 6, 1944, the Germans lost an entire country. France was freed from the withering German grasp as the Third Reich froze like a deer in the headlights on an old country road. But the headlights came from more than one vehicle. There was more than one reason why Germany failed, and really, everything just went as wrong could be. One of the main factors that people generally point to as the reason why the Germans failed is the fact that Hitler himself had opted to hold all of the puppet strings of the Third Reich's military. This alone was problematic for multiple reasons. For one, it was the Führer's belief that the Allies were going to attack France, but they wouldn't be in Normandy. He was firmly convinced that another location, such as Calais, would house the Allied invaders. This led to the unavailability of the proper defense forces at Normandy when D-Day came, because no one could change Hitler's mind about the location of an impending attack. Furthermore, as the Allied boots hit the Normandy sands, Hitler was asleep. The Führer had unusual sleeping habits, and, not unusually, having stayed awake late into the night and sleeping through the early part of the day, he was in deep slumber as news began to reach German ears of the attack. The early confusion around what was happening caused a hesitation to wake the snoozing tyrant, despite the fact that command of the armed forces remained in his hands. And to make matters worse, Hitler awaking still failed to solve any problems. He continued to believe an attack was coming elsewhere. Normandy had to be a diversion. It was a tactic to pull German troops away from the real target, wherever that may be. Unwilling to fall for such a deception, it wasn't until sometime into the afternoon that the Führer finally allowed a counterattack by the German panzer divisions, far too late to save the day. But Hitler wasn't the only military leader who fumbled the ball during the D-Day reaction. Prior to the actual attack, Field Marshals Erwin Rommel and Gerd von Rundstedt were duking it out over how to prepare for the imminent Allied assault. Rommel wanted to essentially line the coasts with the panzer divisions to stop a landing as it happened. Meanwhile, Rundstedt was sure that the proper strategy was to organize the divisions into a single formation further inland, where they could put an end to the Allied advance all at once. When a final conclusion was reached between the two, it created a rather weakened situation, leading to the already sparse resource of troops being split up even further. 4 panzer divisions were formed into the type of centralized reserve wanted by Rundstedt, whilst the other 6 were split evenly between Army Group B and Army Group G to deploy wherever they so pleased, such as along the water lines as Rommel wished. And when D-Day began, the Führer wasn't the only leader unavailable. Rommel had left his men to go home for his wife's birthday celebrations, for example, which proved particularly problematic when General Erich Marx wanted to move the 21st Panzer Division to the beaches to face the Allies. He needed Rommel's permission to do so, given that the 21st Panzers were under Rommel's authority in Army Group B. With the Field Marshal away, Marx had to engage in a string of radio interactions with Rommel's Chief of Staff, Colonel Hans Speidel, before he could secure approval and move the 21st Division. By the time this process was finished, the morning was already over, and Marx's men were slow to reach the coastline, losing men and crucial equipment along the trek as they marched through Allied fire. Even amongst the soldiers and military leaders who were fighting on the front line, the general understanding of what was going on was quite muddled. Some of the commanders at the front were taking in and giving out false information concerning the direction of the battle, with a portion of the Germans falsely believing that they had somehow turned the tide in their own favor. No one really knew what was happening, and thus the reactions, where they even existed, were generally bungled. The troops themselves were scarcely capable either way, as many of the Third Reich's forces were fighting on other fronts, and those in Normandy were a combination of underarmed and ill-prepared Wehrmacht soldiers and Eastern European conscripts captured earlier on in the war. These were far from Germany's best. There was a great deal of confusion, miscalculations, and misunderstandings even before the storming of the beaches. The Germans didn't yet believe that the Allies could pull off such a large-scale attack with the number of troops and equipment they did in fact utilize, because without a port, there just seemed to be no possibility. But that's the catch of all of it. The Allies were remarkable at convincing the Germans to regard as true the exact opposite of the real truth. The deception skills of the Allied powers can be seen in the way that they disrupted German communications. Their schemes to seize the spies and send back double agents, or even the facts that they alone were able to calculate a break in the hazardous weather of Normandy's June 6th skies to execute their landing in an environment no one believed possible. But the real Allied capabilities as illusionists can be summed up into two words: a name: Operation Fortitude. There was a name for the Allied conspiracy, and it was Operation Fortitude. The ultimate goal of the plot was to convince the Third Reich that the anticipated Allied attack on European soil would come, but it wouldn't come to Normandy. And that's exactly what Hitler believed. The deception began the year prior to the actual assault, and it involved the development of an entirely fake armed force. At the time of the birth of Operation Fortitude, within the umbrella of Operation Bodyguard, the Germans had already been under the impression that the most logical point of invasion for the Allies would be at Pas-de-Calais, and the Allied military leaders knew this. No one even had to convince the Germans of such an idea. The thought only needed to be solidified. At the start of 1944, Sub-Operation Quicksilver was launched, with the announcement that now famous and then widely respected U.S. senior officer George S. Patton would be taking command of the 1st U.S. Army Group, shortened to FUSAG. The catch here was that the FUSAG wasn't real. Its men were decoys, its tanks and planes were fake, and much of its equipment was no more than inflatable toys. To make the whole ordeal even more convincing, the Allies feigned obliviousness in allowing the Germans to take photographs as they flew over the decoys of their made-up army. Still pushing to ensure full believability, misleading radio transmissions were intentionally leaked to the Germans. At the same time, the aforementioned double agents fed the Führer and his military leaders the same lies while holding their utmost trust. All of this played perfectly into Hitler's hitherto beliefs and right into the Allied hands. Even if the Germans had caught the double agents in their lies, recognized the FUSAG decoys, and prepared more steadily for a possible attack on Normandy's beaches, there's no guarantee that D-Day still would not have been a failure for the Third Reich. The war was nearing its end, and the dominance of the Nazi regime and military was on a decline already. The Allies simply had more powerful troops, and more of them. The Germans were fighting on more than one front, and they weren't anticipating an immensely large-scale incursion from the French coast. And even though they did expect something, they had an entire coastline to defend if they wanted to cover all their weak points. Roughly 2,000 miles worth of beaches were to be guarded by a scarcely manned and supplied handful of panzer divisions. Meanwhile, the Allies could concentrate all of their utilized troops on one single attack area of their choosing. The Allied side was furthermore employing force by land, sea, and air, but the Germans had no air or naval power to behold. They had men with boots on the ground, and nothing more. A lack of falsehood as to where the attack was going to happen had no bearing on the unanticipated timing, nor would it have kept Hitler from sleeping in late while being the key to unlocking his military's counterattack. It wouldn't have stopped Rommel from going home either, nor any of the other little details that altogether had gone terribly wrong for Germany. The truth is, the Germans failed at Normandy because they were incapable of finishing the war they'd started. By the time of D-Day, they were spread too thin and too deep in poor decisions to climb their way out of the bunker that would one day soon see their ultimate demise.